Deals have a peculiar quality. They tend to change over time. Egypt and Ethiopia have been trying to strike a deal on the terms of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, but new realities on the ground have repeatedly capsized diplomatic endeavors. Now, Egypt is taking things a step further. President El-Sisi says that the military option is on the table and that there would be inconceivable instability in the region if Egypt's water supply was affected. Though the Egyptian leadership has always flexed its military muscle, the threat is now more tangible than before thanks to a new collection of sophisticated weaponry. Since early 2021, Egypt has procured powerful missiles, warplanes, and delivery systems that match its political rhetoric. The circumstances have escalated to the point where a military conflict can no longer be dismissed. I'm your host Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. Today's video is sponsored by Blinkist, an app that takes the highlights from non-fiction books and condenses it to 15 minutes, which you can either read or listen to. Sometimes you just want to go back and review the main ideas without revisiting the entire book. Blinkist helps with that. It has over 14 million users and its library has tons of political history titles like The Next Decade and Sea Power. Using Blinkist, you can go over the highlights of each title in a podcast style. The first 100 people to go to blinkist.com/CaspianReport are going to get unlimited access for 1 week to try out. You'll also get 25% off if you want the full membership, so move fast. The 7-day trial is completely free and you can cancel at any time during that trial. What appears on the map is only a tiny part of what really is. In Egypt, less than 3% of the land is habitable. The desert covers much of the country, and nearly the entirety of the population resides along the banks of the Nile River. Although the Nile is not commercially navigable, it forms the heart and soul of Egypt. Its splendid history, culture, and arts all stem from the Nile. Ethiopia has an equally remarkable history, but a very different geography. Its territory is a whole lot more fertile and mountainous, giving way to a dozen major rivers. At least 3 watershed systems originate from the Ethiopian highlands, and much of the periphery relies on the country as a source of fresh water, earning it the nickname the Water Tower of Africa. Both Egypt and Ethiopia are demographic juggernauts. Each has a population exceeding 100 million, and each is growing at extraordinary levels. Ethiopia will eclipse the 200 million benchmark by 2050, while Egypt will reach that level by 2075. Clearly, both nations need to plan ahead and secure the necessary resources to sustain such high levels of populations. In Ethiopia, however, there are additional complications. Its population is ethnically diverse, and only about 45% of the public has access to electricity. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, sitting northeast of Ethiopia, is expected to provide around 6,500 megawatts of hydropower. That is not going to be enough to fix all of Ethiopia's shortcomings, but it would quadruple the amount of electricity generated in the country. Millions of citizens would be uplifted from poverty, and the government would be able to provide essential services to its remote regions. In a place as remote and ethnically diverse as Ethiopia, infrastructure can be a valuable conduit for unity. But there is a catch. The flow of the Nile, including the Blue Nile, is remarkably slow. By comparison, the Amazon River flows at a rate of 65 times greater than the Nile, and the Mississippi flows 6 times greater. The gentle water flow is a characteristic of the Nile, but that trait also makes hydropower projects somewhat unpredictable. A rapid filling of the Ethiopian dam's reservoir would likely further reduce the river's flow, which would then affect agricultural and industrial standings in the downstream nations. It is this anxiety that makes the Ethiopian project such a controversy. Now, going by international law, Ethiopia is technically within its rights to develop and employ its hydropower potential. There exists no treaty between Ethiopia and Egypt on the share of water resources. That said, sometimes international law fails to take context into account, and Cairo is having none of it. A dam along the Blue Nile would jeopardize Egypt's freshwater supply. International law takes second place. Thus, to stop the project, Cairo has been negotiating the terms and conditions of the dam. It has been a painstakingly long negotiation process that has lasted over a decade. Initially, the talks were about stopping the construction of the dam, then it was about reducing its size, but after both discussions failed, the talks shifted to the rate at which the reservoir is being filled. The trouble has always been that Egypt lacks leverage on Ethiopia, and the Ethiopians have exploited that fact by negotiating in bad faith. More specifically, Addis Ababa has been using the negotiations to buy time and impose new realities on the ground rather than reach an agreement. Now, the negotiations are not so much about the existence or size of the Ethiopian dam, but its technical aspects. More specifically, the talks focus on the duration of the filling procedure. Egypt wants to extend the process as much as possible, preferably by 20 years. This would set a legal precedent for future dam negotiations, while also giving the Egyptians time to prepare their infrastructure and industries for the water shortcomings. About 99% of Egypt's population lives along the banks of the Nile River, so it's imperative to plan ahead and get things right. Ethiopia, however, wants to avoid setting a legal precedent. It doesn't want to commit itself to mandatory talks in the future, so it wants a deal that is non-binding, something that doesn't require it to give guarantees. Plus, Ethiopia wants to get things rolling as soon as possible, and the state is eyeing somewhere between 2023 and 2030. The gap between Ethiopian and Egyptian lawmakers has become incompatible. Each side is stuck in its own discourse, and neither can afford to step back and let the other dictate terms. It has become a zero-sum game. With that in mind, in July 2020, Ethiopia completed the first filling phase, loading 4.9 billion cubic meters of water into the dam's reservoir. A year later, the second filling phase was completed with a load of 13.5 billion cubic meters of water. There is now enough water stored to begin producing hydropower. And if things keep going at this pace, the Ethiopian dam will reach full power generating capacity in just 2 years. Egypt has to find ways to delay the filling before it's too late. It has tried all sorts of tactics, but Egypt is working against the clock. Foreign actors have no appetite for a new battle space for power and influence. Plenty of powerhouses are interested in Egypt and its surroundings, but each has more pressing priorities. Russia and the United States would rather avoid a new front in their global competitions. Plus, Chinese companies are working on the Ethiopian project, which further complicates the calculus. Regional powers such as Saudi Arabia, Sudan, and the United Arab Emirates are preoccupied with reconciling relations with Israel. The last thing they want is more controversy. Meanwhile, European powers such as France and Italy are playing both sides. France, for instance, is supplying hydroelectric equipment to Ethiopia while also selling warplanes to Egypt. So French planes could end up bombing French equipment. Yeah, it's exactly like that. The only country Egypt can rely on is itself. Taking that to heart, Egypt has gone on a shopping spree. It has come in possession of powerful Scalp EG cruise missiles. These are missiles designed to strike targets of high value located deep in enemy territory, such as airports, command and control centers, early warning systems, and, of course, hydropower dams. The missiles would be delivered by Rafale fighter jets and escorted by Su-35s, which were also recently procured this year, in fact. Also, this year, Egypt signed military collaboration agreements with 3 Nile River riparian states, Sudan, Uganda, and Burundi, while in the previous year, the Egyptian Air Force demonstrated aerial refueling capabilities for combat aircraft. Yes, Egypt has worked tirelessly to beef up its military capacity. The type of aircraft, missiles, and assets give teeth to Egypt's rhetoric. Though there are still questions on the range, firepower, skill, and integration of systems, the Egyptian Air Force is inching closer to being capable of destroying the Ethiopian dam. However, the filling process is now at such a stage that it may already be too late for Egypt to fully destroy the dam. Having filled up with at least 18 billion cubic meters of water, downstream Egypt and Sudan would be the first to suffer the consequences of flooding. So, any attack on the dam would have to be surgical, targeting specific systems or facilities within the site, but not the actual dam itself. The goal would be to hurt its operational state without destroying it. Beyond a direct military strike, there may be an alternative way of forcing Ethiopia to compromise. In November 2020, Ethiopia mobilized its military into the Tigray region to suppress a secessionist movement and restore government control. The hostilities are still going strong, but in the months since, tens of thousands of refugees have crossed the border into Sudan. While previously the Sudanese government had come to an understanding with Ethiopia's hydropower project, the influx of refugees has reignited tensions between the two. There have already been multiple low-level skirmishes between Sudanese troops and Ethiopian militias. At the same time, unrest is brewing in Ethiopia's Benishangul Gumuz region. This is noteworthy because the region borders Sudan and has the Blue Nile flowing through it. Slightly to the south, in the West Welaga zone of the Oromia region, the Ethiopian government has been cracking down on local militias. This is big because if the Oromos start feeling sidelined, it could spell disaster for Ethiopia at large. The Oromos account for about a third of Ethiopia's population, and they were the source of the 2018 unrest that unseated the previous administration. President Abiy has not lost control over these ethnic regions, but he needs to walk a tightrope between pacifying separatist sentiment while not provoking an ethnic backlash. This delicate dance provides El-Sisi with an opportunity to monitor and, wherever possible, exploit Ethiopia's internal vulnerabilities to extract concessions in the negotiations over the dam. It's the same policy that his predecessors tried, a failed policy that is, but Egypt may have no other choice. When diplomacy fails, armed conflict can no longer be dismissed. Egypt needs leverage, something to bargain with. If it cannot achieve its goals through diplomatic channels, it may well resort to brute force. That shouldn't come as a surprise. Egyptian President Anwar Sadat once stated that water was the only matter that could take Egypt to war. Today, Egypt faces its most pernicious water crisis in history. The government may yet try some aggressive negotiating. It can do so by either winning Sudan's favor and jointly launching a preemptive surgical strike, or by persuading the Tigray and Oromo to switch allegiances in hope of destabilizing Ethiopia. Neither options are particularly encouraging, but the alternative for Egypt is to live on with an axe hanging over it. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. If you enjoy our content and want to support us to remain self-sufficient, please visit our Patreon page. The link for it will be in the description box. Thank you for watching, and Sahol.